So I made the very controversial decision, as I'm sure plenty of you are aware, of me putting Justin Fields as my number six quarterback. And it wasn't real. It feels weird to have him as my number six quarterback because I'm not anti Justin Fields by any means. I wouldn't be shocked at all if he ends up being a really successful quarterback. But I had some flaws, and one of the flaws, I feel very confident about everything else I mentioned. But the one thing that people did bring up that I mentioned that I'm like, well, maybe I could be wrong about that was deep ball accuracy. Now, obviously, he has a great arm, but his accuracy, I felt like the first time I watched through his tape was a bit lacking. And so I felt like he would miss throws here and there. And I wanted to kind of go back and take a look and see, were the people commenting that right, or was I right? So the best way to do that is just literally watch every single deep ball again. And that's what I did. I went through the tape. I got every single deep ball that I could find. And by my definition of deep ball is just a pass that's over 20 air yards past the line of scrimmage. That's what I went with because you got to get a cutoff somewhere. And actually, I even got them all together. I'm going to put it in a video. I plan on posting that video just a few minutes after I post this one. So be on the lookout for that. You can just sort of see all of the deep throws and kind of make your own grade, make your own adjustment on it. But the way I wanted to do this was I wanted to kind of try to come up with some sort of concrete ish way of saying, what's the deep ball? How good of a deep ball does he throw? And so I came up with this grading scale. This is what it is. There's technically 6 total options. I have a grading scale of 4 through 0. If we start from the top, that's just him hitting his spot. Him making a perfect throw, that's a 4 out of 4. The highest grade you can get. If something wasn't perfect, but it was still a good throw, I'm still giving that a 3. So let's say, for example, a lot of times I think, some of these would be like a guy's wide open past the defense and Fields kind of underthrows it a little bit, but it's still a touchdown. Then I'm like, okay, I'm still going to give that credit, even though it wasn't a perfect throw, but I can't give it a perfect score either. So 3, also, like, let's say it's a little bit missed, so a receiver has to dive, can't get a touchdown, something like that. That's what a 3 would be. I would even do a 3 if, like, just Fields, he was accurate, but he put way too much air under things, but then there'll be the occasional 4, 2, and 0. A 2 is just a true 50-50 ball. And in fact, I was originally not going to have this category, but there were just some that I legitimately could not decide between a 3 and a 1. So luckily there's a number in between those two. So I went with a 2 there. And then number 1 is just basically there's less than a 50-50 chance of it being caught in a vacuum. My thought was, if it's, an average receiver going up against an average defensive back, does that get caught more than 50% of the time? If the answer is yes, then it's higher than a 1 and it's a 3. If it's no, then it's a 1. And if I'm not sure, then it's a 2. That's how that went. And a 0, I made these zeros only a complete miss throw. So the way I decided to actually word it was less than a 10% chance of it being caught. Because yes, there is a chance that, like, on even some of these awful throws, maybe a receiver makes an Odell Beckham like catch, but for the most part, that's not going to happen. So that's why I used that wordage exactly. And I also graded some just with an asterisk because I couldn't give it a grade. Usually an asterisk would be something like a receiver is so wide open that I just couldn't feel comfortable grading it at all because they're so open that Fields doesn't even really, try to make it too accurate. He's just trying to make sure he gets the throw. And that's kind of how I would word that in my head of that situation is if Fields is so confident the throw is going to be made that he completely changes the way he's throwing because of how open a receiver is, then I couldn't really grade that because, if he puts too much air under it, it's unfair to give him some criticism. And also if he makes it accurate, well, it's kind of unfair to, say that also just because no one else is around him. Or if he makes it inaccurate, it'd be unfair to really blame him because he's just trying to make the throw. He's not trying to put it in a perfect spot. So I just got rid of those altogether, which I felt like was fair. There's also a couple, like when pressure is coming immediately and he just kind of flings one up there. That's not really a great way to measure his deep ball accuracy because it's a completely different situation. So I think there were 5 of those total that I had. And weirdly enough, 3 of them were in the Rutgers game. So that's how that worked. And as a whole, there were 28 total deep passes he threw last year, which is a bit low, or 28 after I took out the 5. So it was, 33 total, take out the 5, 28 deep passes, which is, again, over 20 plus air yards past the line of scrimmage. That's what I went with. Because it seems like some people, when they measure deep passes, they just talk about how much, like if someone throws it 10 yards, but then the receiver runs for 80, they still include that, which to me seems like completely unfair. You got to measure it air yards wise. So that's what I did. And here's how I graded all of the plays. So the highest total was number 3 grades, which makes sense. I mean, that's a, pretty good pass, but not perfect. And he actually had a good number of number 4 grades. That was the second highest category. And number 2 was what I expected. Only 3 of those, pretty uncommon. And while there wasn't a ton of number 1s either, which I find interesting because, that just basically means that it's not a great throw, but also not a disaster, there were 6 number 0 grades, which is shockingly high. I did not expect that. I expected, by far and away for there to be a ton of 3 and 1s and the occasional 4 and 0. That's not how I ended up grading it. So I want to be clear here and say that just because I have a system does not mean that I think that this is written in stone by any means and this is the perfect thing. I'm not pro football focused. I'm not going to get offended if you say that my system is flawed in some way. It is flawed in some way. It's basically me just looking at it and saying, that feels like a 2. That's kind of how it works. But I just figured it'd be kind of a good visual and a good sort of way of actually tracking how I feel. And with that, Justin Fields' total grade ended up being, I would say, even lower than I expected, to be honest. It was just a 2.2, which is definitely on the low side, I would say. I mean, I would say the average quarterback gets a 2. So just slightly above average is not what I expected from Fields. I was guessing it was going to be around like a 2.8 to a 3, which I would still say is on the low side just because of, compared to all the other guys in this top 6, like Trey Lance, I'm assuming is way higher. Zach Wilson, I'm assuming is way higher. So I should be clear. It's low for a potential top 5 pick, but it's still high for just a regular quarterback. And so, it's a small sample size, 28 plays. It's hard to really grade it that much, which is kind of unfortunate. But at the same time, I do think it's fair to say, like, let's bring up the fact that it wasn't perfect, his deep ball, which is usually talked about as like his best attribute, which is his big arm. But I care more about how accurately you throw it and how consistently accurate you throw it. And it's a little bit rough. I mean, the Clemson game comes to mind where everyone was going crazy about his great Clemson game. But in my grading, I gave him 3 threes and a 0 because he did definitely miss one of the throws. And then he also had, I'd say, a good amount that were just sort of close, but just not quite there. Also, there was one that I believe was too open. So I just gave it an asterisk behind. And like, there was like, I remember there was one where it's like, there's this guy wide open and he just throws it and not quite far enough. So the receiver has to kind of come back to make the grab. And he still does. And it's a touchdown. So everyone says, hey, that's great. But in the NFL, it doesn't really work that way. So the final verdict for me is that, yes, Justin Fields can absolutely make some deep balls, make some deep throws, but he can also miss some. And he's not perfect at that, which is, I'm not sure if we should really call it as much of a strength as I feel like people are calling it. Again, I've also fought back on, I feel like the things people say Justin Fields is bad at, he's not really that bad at. Like, he's not this one read quarterback. I don't get why people keep bringing that up. Like, again, I keep saying Trevor Lawrence is way more of a one read quarterback than Fields is. No one talks about it. Don't even get me started on does he love football? How do we know? We watch football. It looks like he does on tape. I guess I would say probably. So like, there definitely are frustrating things, but I do think that everyone keeps saying everyone's being so disrespectful to Fields. I do think that you can criticize some of what he said, some of what he's done on tape. I think so. And I think I've done a fair job of doing that while also giving him praise when it's due. And I don't know, maybe he'll get better. Maybe he'll Josh Allen his way into being a star quarterback. But to me, this is definitely a flaw and something he'll have to work on going into the draft. And we'll see if he does. So yeah, that's what I think. What do you guys think? Let me know in the comments below. Always love hearing from you. And of course, as always, thanks for watching.